BBC News with Sue Montgomery. The US and South Korea say they'll strengthen cooperation over possible use of nuclear weapons in any conflict with North Korea. The agreement, called the Washington Declaration, gives Seoul greater insight into America's nuclear planning and a greater voice in its strategy. Barbara Plett-Usher in Washington has more on the new provisions.
They're not a big change for the United States because it has treaty obligations to defend South Korea, including with nuclear weapons. This is really about reassuring South Koreans that it's serious about those commitments because they're getting more and more anxious about the nuclear threat from North Korea. There's been talk about maybe we should develop our own nuclear weapons, our own nuclear deterrence. Even President Yoon has mused about that aloud. So this is a response. This is to say, look, we really have your back.
Republicans in the US House of Representatives have passed a bill that will raise the country's debt ceiling in conjunction with big spending cuts. Republicans are hoping it will convince the president to begin negotiations on spending cuts. The Republican House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, explained the move to reporters after the vote.
The House Republicans just passed the only bill in Washington that lifts the debt limit, ends wasteful Washington spending, and puts America back on the right economic path. That we're going to limit the growth in the future. We're going to save by pulling back this unspent COVID money. We're going to grow this economy by making us energy independent again and getting more people, encouraging them back to work. The sad part here is now the Democrats need to do their job.
The measure is unlikely to be approved by the Democratic-held Senate. A fragile three-day ceasefire in Sudan has been threatened by an outbreak of renewed fighting between rival factions of the military. So far, much of central Khartoum remains calm. Our diplomatic correspondent Paul Adams says the situation appears stable enough for evacuations.
This window is short and it is fragile. Many Sudanese are worried that with the eyes of the world sort of distracted or taken away from Sudan, the field will be open for the two warring generals to resume the fight and possibly to escalate the fight. We are seeing dire warnings from the UN that a further continuation of the fighting could trigger an exodus. They estimate, in the region of 250,000 people. We've already seen probably in excess of 10,000 people fleeing across the border into Chad.
The UN's envoy to Haiti has told the Security Council that gang violence is expanding at an alarming rate. Maria Isabel Salvador said murder, kidnapping and sexual violence were inflicting terror on much of the population. BBC News. The Walt Disney Corporation has sued the Republican governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, seeking to overturn state efforts to exert control over its theme park in Orlando. The lawsuit comes in response to a decision to end agreements that gave Disney powers of self-government in the complex. A spokesman for Governor DeSantis said the lawsuit was an attempt to undermine the will of voters. In an historic move that's been welcomed by those seeking a more inclusive Roman Catholic Church, Pope Francis will for the first time allow women to vote at a global meeting of bishops. Here's Kat Wiener.
The US-based Women's Ordination Conference, which advocates for women priests, described the reform as a significant crack in the stained glass ceiling. While women have been allowed synods in the past, they've done so only as observers. At this year's meeting, 5 religious sisters will be granted voting rights. The 300th assembly will still consist mostly of male bishops. In a further break with tradition, the Pope announced that voting rights would also be extended to 70 hand-picked, non-clerical members of the religious community and that he hoped half of these would be women.
Argentina has announced it will start paying for imports from China in the Chinese currency, the yuan, rather than in US dollars. The Argentinian economy minister said the decision had been made to try to protect the country's international reserves, which are held in US dollars. Argentina's outflow of dollars has increased as it tries to shore up its economy. A jury in New York has convicted the American hip-hop artist Pras Michel on 10 charges relating to a foreign lobbying campaign by a wealthy Malaysian businessman. The trial followed an admission by the Fugees rapper that he'd received $20 million in exchange for helping the fugitive billionaire Jolo get a photo with the then US President Obama. BBC News.